Welcome Yamhill County to Speaking Frankly. I'm your host, and our tagline is, "And how we doin'?" Today we have a very difficult subject to talk about, human trafficking. And from the Soroptimist International McMinnville, we have Marti Crook and Savenia Falquist. Marti, welcome.
Thank you.
Savenia, welcome to Speaking Frankly. Who are the Soroptimists International, and would you talk about the McMinnville chapter and what you do?
Sure. Soroptimist means best for women, and we are a global volunteer service organization with about 95,000 members from about 120 countries. So we've been around a long time, since 1921 as an organization, but in McMinnville we have about 54 members, and we've been around since the 1950s. I can't remember exactly what year. But a lot of people don't know about us. You say Soroptimist, I'm a Soroptimist, and they'll say, well, what's that? So we always have to go through the big explanation. But we're best known in the community, I'd say, for some of our fundraisers, actually. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you're probably familiar with our Turkey Rama elephant ear booth. That's a very popular.
Very familiar.
Yeah. Most people, when I say that, they'll be like, oh, yeah, I know that. And then we also have a big fundraiser that we do called our Wine Country Holiday Home Tour, which we do around the holidays. Mm-hmm. And we make most of our money through both of those two fundraisers. So our mission is we work to improve the lives of women and girls through programs leading to social and economic empowerment. So that's what our mission is for Soroptimist International of the Americas and for our club. We work on a lot of different things in the community. Some of the things we've done over the years. A long time ago, we helped put together, or start actually, the Bear Hugs program at mm-hmm. McMinnville High School. We gave the Jaws of Life to the fire department. I mean, you name it, we've just about done it because we've been around for a long time. But we helped Juliet's House, we helped Henderson House, lots of other nonprofits. But our biggest focus is a program that we call Live Your Dream, which is to help women who are going back to school to better their lives for their family. And so, in fact, last week we had a wonderful luncheon to give out those awards to, and we awarded $8,000 to 3 women in our community. So we feel really good about that. Well, they're not really scholarships, they're actually financial awards.
Oh, uh-huh.
Yeah, so they do go through an application process, and then when they're chosen, we give them the money, and they're free to use it for whatever they need, you know, for the rent, child care, computers, clothing, or education expenses, whatever they need. So we work all year long to do those programs so that we can give that money away and help those women. But one of the biggest new kind of issues that we've been involved in and working towards improving is the issue of human trafficking.
Right.
And so that's kind of why we're here today.
So the next logical question is, what is human trafficking?
Well, basically it's a form of modern-day slavery,
yeah.
In which people are forced or tricked into performing a service or having a service or doing a service for someone else who gets to profit from that. That's basically what it is.
Sure.
It's just slavery.
Would you describe the elements of human trafficking?
Well, there's basically 3 elements. It's the act, and what that is basically the acquiring of a person, or a slave, if you will, mm-hmm. And transporting them and moving them around from place to place. And then there's the means, and really what that is how do they do it? How do they get this person to become their slave.
Sure.
You know, whether it's through force or fraud, coercion, abduction,
kidnapping.
yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
their vulnerability levels. So how are they getting them? And then what's the purpose? Why are they doing it? And of course, it's exploitation, which is lots of times prostitution, sexual exploitation, forced labor. And even, believe it or not, the removal of internal organs from people is a part of human trafficking. So
this is a global issue, but would you talk about domestic minor sex trafficking in the U.S.?
Oh yes, absolutely. In fact, when Soroptimist International of McMinnville, when we first started getting into this topic, is so huge. I mean, the whole idea of human trafficking, it's, you know, as I just explained, it's a very broad thing. And when you start looking at it, you become overwhelmed and you're like, how can we ever make a difference, or how can we ever do anything to change something that's so huge and widespread?
Right.
So we formed a committee in our club, and we decided that we needed to sharpen our focus and just kind of pinpoint one area of human trafficking. And so we decided that domestic minor sex trafficking would be the way to go, because that's closer to home. And,
sure.
You know, so and basically what domestic minor sex trafficking is any United States citizen who is under the age of 18 who's being forced into commercial sex acts. That's what it is in a nutshell. And so that's what we're working towards trying to eliminate. And
I think a lot of people in Yamhill County don't believe that it's actually happening in Yamhill County, yet
right.
we know it is.
Right, yeah. Well, it's people think that you're going to see streetwalkers a lot of the times, and that's really not what is happening necessarily around here. And we don't know that. We don't know it as a fact in terms of proof that it's happening, other than that you can see that there are ads sometimes in the internet, and if they're tracked down, they can be tracked down to the McMinnville area.
Sure.
So it is happening here, and if it's not happening in great numbers, eventually it will be, and that's why we're trying so hard to raise awareness to people, to make them understand that it can happen here.
So it's as much about prevention as the topic itself.
Very much so. Yeah, we're trying to protect our young people and educate them,
right.
so that they're aware that they can become a victim.
And a lot of this happens over the internet.
Yeah, technology has been a really a boost to the trafficking industry, because it makes it so easy, and because they're more behind closed doors.
Sure, no one sees it.
No one
Not
sees
even
it.
mom and dad when it's a child on the internet watching something, unless it's blocked out. And
the other piece to this too is pornography.
oh, of course.
Child pornography, and so that is part of the sexual exploitation. That impacts every community. So there's a lot of different ways people can be forced into trafficking, and the children, child porn, I don't have the actual statistic, but is absolutely prevalent, and we can't get ahead of it. And so for raising awareness, it's really important to identify what specific pieces are considered forcing the sexual exploitation.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what is the scope of this problem?
Well, we saw some statistics the other day that really blew us away at one of our meetings, and what we were told was that worldwide there are 27 million men, women, and children that are in slavery right now.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And that it generates $150 billion in revenue, human trafficking does, and that 99% of victims are never rescued. And another statistic is that every 30 seconds another person is made a slave.
Every 30 seconds.
That's what the statistics we saw were. And as far as for domestic minor sex trafficking, what we're finding is that, you know, there's a lot of street kids
Yes.
in our society right now, a large population, and they're a very vulnerable group. And what we've learned is that when a kid leaves home and becomes a street kid, that oftentimes that a third of those kids will be approached within 48 hours of leaving home to be groomed to be a prostitute. That's happening in the United States. And then when they and then a fifth of those children can become hooked up through their pimp into organized crime and then be trafficked, you know, all over the United States. And pimps will control these kids and make them go to motel rooms and perform sex acts maybe up to 10 or 15 times a day, 6 days a week. And so if you can imagine the scope of that is that one pimp, if he has 4 girls working for him, can make more than $600,000 a year, untaxed, of course.
Of course.
And you know, and it's very low overhead for him. You can use a girl over and over again, and you don't have to put much money into it. You know.
Or a boy.
Or a boy, that's right. Mm-hmm. So the average age of girls going into this sex trafficking is 12 to 14, and boys actually is 11 to 13. But you're absolutely right; they're vulnerable, and it's happening to them too. Not to the same level, of course, but it's definitely out there happening to the boys. So these pimps don't have any, they don't care anything about these kids.
Of course not.
They just want to make their money, and so they're going to use them over and over.
When you're talking about the multi-billions of dollars that you're talking about, that's larger than some countries' entire gross product.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, just sex trafficking, I haven't heard the latest on that, but one statistic I heard a couple years ago was $19 billion here in the United States on sex trafficking.
That's unbelievable.
It's increased over the
Yeah,
years.
and it's just going up, you know. So, yeah, it's and it's also important to know though that it's not just street kids at all. And
it could be anyone.
It could be any child, any girl or boy is vulnerable, and that's why we want so much to let them know about this, because how it happens a lot of times is they're approached. These pimps know what they're doing. They've studied this art form of enticing kids. They'll trick them or lure them into it by pretending to be their boyfriend, giving them gifts, you know, telling them how pretty or beautiful they are, and then they convince them that they love them, and then the next thing you know, they're demanding that they do things for them, you know.
Do a little favor for me? Yeah,
and you know, help, or baby, I need you to help us pay the rent, so you got to have sex with these people. Okay. And then, you know, then it turns into a violent scenario, and then they can't get out of it because sometimes they're too embarrassed or they're too afraid because they're threatening them. They might even be threatening their families. So difficult.
And the segue, there's a kind of a gateway to this too, which is a lot of times they will start the children out in pornography or in strip clubs.
Sure.
And then it escalates. It just depends on, you know,
who's luring them in.
Yeah. And there is a vulnerability factor. A lot of these kids have been sexually abused.
Sure.
Come from abusive homes and end up, you know, with what they tag as throwaway kids living on the streets. And like Marty's talking about, these pimps and these people who lure these kids in, they've spent a lot of time learning how to assess people and identify.
Sure, the psychological makeup.
And so anybody's vulnerable to it, but they do have I mean, it's a $150 billion industry.
Right.
They do go to schools. They do target areas where kids hang out. And so it's important for people to know.
Yeah, it is. So how did Soroptimist International become involved? You have one thing on your website that talks about Soroptimists Stop Trafficking.
Well, I suppose we heard about it, and Soroptimist International somehow became aware of it. And because we are an organization that works for improving the lives of women and girls, it was like, this is a kind of a thing that we need to become involved in.
It's a key issue.
Yeah, and these girls need our help. These girls and women need our help out there. And so it basically got adopted from the highest level. Around 2007 is when it first started coming into our awareness, and then it started trickling down. So in 2008 is when we formed the Soroptimist Stop Trafficking program, and so we developed materials for all clubs to be able to access, and we created white paper on the subject and all kinds of training. When we have our workshops that we get together at meetings, region conferences, and federation conventions and stuff, we have workshops on it and special speakers, and clubs all over the world have projects specifically. Our club several years ago, we sponsored a run, a 10K run. We raised $10,000 because at the time there was talk of developing a shelter in the Portland area, and that all kind of fell by the wayside. Funding, it didn't happen, but we still ended up giving our money away to other shelters that exist, to help these young victims. And so Soroptimists all over the world make that as a project. So we've been doing that since 2008.
There was a past local task force formed by the Soroptimists here in McMinnville called YCAST. Would you talk about that and whether you'd like to start another project like that?
Absolutely. Actually, at our last year, we had a Trafficking and Awareness event last year, and we thought, well, all the time when we have these awareness events, people come up to us at the end and they ask, well, what can we do? How can we become involved in this? So last year we basically had a sign-up sheet at the end of our awareness event giving people the opportunity to become part of a task force, or just to see if there would be interest in it. And we were really surprised. We probably had 25 people sign up that they were interested in forming a task force. And so the Soroptimists helped kind of get that going off the ground. We were very involved in it for the first few meetings, and but being that we're so busy on our own, we kind of had to sort of break away from it ourselves, and so but we got them started and got them going with a chairperson and everything like that, and it's just one of those things. They met for quite a bit and they learned a lot about the subject, and but things just happened and they weren't able to stay together because the chairperson had a family situation that she had to take care of. So
it's hard to lose a leader.
Yeah, it sure is. But we would certainly love to have a task force and become part of a task force again, or do something to get more committee members involved. And there were some men on that committee, and that's what we really need to get involved in this issue, is get more men involved in it, because Soroptimist is primarily a women's organization. And so, we just need the voice of men to help us with this.
So would you say what YCAST stands for?
Yamhill County Against Sex Trafficking.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. So luring people, both boys and girls, into slavery is prevalent. Could you both talk about that? Savenia, would you talk about it from the Henderson House end?
I mean, I think that it would be nice if people came to the conference and they could hear from an FBI agent about the industry as a whole for the United States. Speaking from Henderson House in Yamhill County, we see vulnerable women and children being lured into trafficking based on what we're hearing is more what we call survival trafficking.
Yes.
It's really about having a need for housing or basic needs, and maybe an addiction, and either trafficking themselves for that or trafficking their children for that. And so those are kind of the things that we hear about. We have not had a lot of people reporting of the industry style of trafficking. So I think that it's something we want to get ahead of.
Sure. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. You have an upcoming workshop, and let's talk about this a little bit. It's Human Trafficking Awareness Workshop, and it's called Breaking the Silence. Would you please both talk about the date and where it is?
Well, it's Saturday, April 9th from 10 to 3 at Chemeketa Community College here in McMinnville. And we'll be having 3 different speakers. We're going to have lunch available for people to purchase. We'll be showing some documentary films about trafficking. We'll have a panel discussion. So the event is designed to raise awareness to the community about the issue, which is the primary goal of Soroptimist, is to raise that awareness, because we can't solve the problem on our own, but we're trying to just get the word out there so people believe it's happening.
Sure. And
so that they will want to stand up and help us do something about it.
So again, Yamhill County, that is Saturday, April 9th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Chemeketa Community College, McMinnville campus, and it's called Breaking the Silence. If you want to be brought to an awareness or educated about this subject, please come to this facility and hear all about it.
And it's a free event, and it's really worthwhile to come and get the information and have those speakers. We have someone from the FBI task force on trafficking there, and someone from Shared Hope International, which is an organization which works to rescue victims all over the world of sex trafficking. And they actually have a shelter in the Washington area, which is where we have contributed some of those funds that we raised. We gave them those funds, and we've had them speak to us before at some of our other events, and so they always have really great information. And
And then the third person is the Child Sexual Exploitation Coordinator for Oregon Department of Justice. So she's a statewide coordinator who actually is addressing this in Oregon.
Awesome.
So 3 very, very well known and versed people on the subject matter.
That's great. So this is a committee within Soroptimists, and the chair of the committee is Marlene Tebow, who couldn't be with us today. But how many are in your committee?
Like 8?
Yeah, about 8 of us, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, it's just one of our committees. We call the committee Imagine Life Without Violence. And so
That's a great name.
Yeah, so this is one of the areas that we work on for that. We also work on domestic violence, and teen dating violence, and all kinds of different things. But
and Savina's talked about that before too. So luring both boys and girls into this slavery, you were talking about strip clubs, but it's also prevalent on the internet. And one of the numbers that Marty was giving me the other day was that 90% are women and girls, and about 10% are men and boys.
I think that's the stats that we have.
Right.
And I think that we need to go a little bit deeper and ask more questions and identify. I do believe that the males is a higher number. I really do, because it's just not comfortable to talk about in the male, in our society. And I just know of a lot of rings and a lot of different, a lot in the bigger cities. But there's a lot of organized crime and exploitation of boys. And so I do think that it's much higher than 10%. But again, the FBI director, the FBI representative will be able to talk more about our Tri-County area and what that really looks like for us.
Yeah, and that's most important, is to know the local area. So this is not just about prostitution, but seeking vulnerable boys and girls that have been sexually and mentally abused.
And that goes back to the really, if you look at a continuum and you go up on risk,
Right.
the really high risk youth are the ones that are homeless, the ones that live in shelters. They estimate that 30% of youth in shelters will be sexually exploited, and 70% of youth that are homeless will be sexually exploited.
That's too big of a number. So how does Henderson House advocate for the homeless and these abuse victims?
We provide advocacy, so whether that's just community-based or through shelter.
Mm-hmm.
We support efforts at the national level to help keep people safe.
Yes.
And so most of the work that we do right now is probably people who come in for domestic violence or sexual assault and then disclose of having been trafficked, either as a child or into their adulthood.
Sure.
And so we do a lot of one-on-one support, provide mental health services, contracted out, support groups are huge, and safety planning. So
I would think that's really extremely important.
yeah, coming up with a solid plan of safety and identifying all the risks and how to do that. We work with other shelters statewide and nationally if we have to. So.
And with 40% of the homeless count being school-age children, I would think that's more and more important every year.
It is, as someone who is in the trenches, it's very frightening. I want to find out what we really are dealing with, but I also want to get ahead of it if we can.
Prevention-wise.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you talk about your human, I've already done that, never mind. Is the demand for human trafficking increasing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're only hearing the statistics going up all the time.
Yeah,
You know.
and this is worldwide, it's not just here.
Right. Yeah, everywhere. And it's a lot that the technology, I think, just makes it so much easier to access. And the pornography side of things is making it more prevalent. It's just is such a big component in the trafficking is the pornography and how that leads to kind of a demand for the actual sex trafficking.
Well, there seems to be a very high demand everywhere.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
And we will be showing A Path Appears, a segment on trafficking. And in that film, I think we're going to do it during lunch so that people have, the option. But
Sure.
that film, it was actually done by Nicholas Kristoff, who is from Yamhill County.
Yes, Jane Kristoff's son.
Yes, and so amazing work. But what it depicts is the various types of trafficking. And in that film, it talks about lawyers, dentists, doctors, upper middle class income men who spend their weekends with their families and first thing Monday morning will go and solicit sex on their way to work.
That is almost impossible for us to believe, but I know it's true.
Yeah.
It's hard to talk about, and it's hard to put yourself in that mind space.
Right.
But we're trying to raise that awareness and just start talking about it. If we didn't have demand, we wouldn't have this industry.
So this is going to be my very last question. We have about 30 seconds. Where do we go from here, besides the workshop?
Well, I mean, I guess just continuing to learn however you can. Come to the workshop would be the first step.
Right.
Join a group, like form a task force if you can, or become a part of a task force, and write letters to your congressman and stuff when you see bills that are coming up to make harsher laws for the Johns and the pimps.
Sure. Savenia?
And know that we really do want men to be our allies and to be a part of this work to help protect and to help set a standard in our society that says this is not okay. And we know that there's just so many wonderful men, and we want to invite them to the table.
Yes, so even though they can't be the part of the Soroptimist group, they could be part of a subcommittee within that.
Well, they could become a Soroptimist if they want to.
Is that right?
Yes.
I did not know this.
We do have some men, not in our club, but in other clubs.
Awesome. So thank you, Savenia, very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Marty, for
Thank
bringing
you.
this awareness. I hope that you all get out and go to this workshop. I think it's super important, and it can only do very much good within Yamhill County and across our world. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.